My lazy husband betrayed me with my best friend when we had 2 children. My best friend betrayed me by becoming pregnant with my spouse while he was unfaithful. And then my own mother attempted to persuade me to grant them full custody of my children. My husband Jack and I have been together since I was 22, and he was 24. We dated for almost 2 years before he asked me to marry him. We've been wed for the past 13 years and have 2 children together. During our 2nd year of dating, Jack introduced me to his mom, Mary. I liked her right from the start and made every effort to win her approval. But sadly, she didn't feel the same. Mary had been a widow for a long time, ever since her husband died from a heart attack years ago. She raised Jack by herself, so they are obviously very close. You could say he's a bit of a mama's boy and was anxious about introducing me to his mother, as he always craved her approval in everything he did. The primary reason Mary never warmed up to me is because I come from a relatively affluent family with parents who were university professors. Growing up, I had a rather privileged life. Although my parents supported me by covering my college costs and buying me my first car so I could commute to work, they also taught me the importance of being self-reliant and finding my own way in life. I've always worked hard to support myself and never asked my parents for any financial aid after I finished college. In contrast, Jack had a tougher upbringing. His father served in the police force, so he was rarely around. After his father passed away, Jack and Mary became inseparable. Mary struggled with alcoholism, so Jack, from a young age, had to take care of her. He began working at a local grocery store at a young age to earn extra money. When he was in college, he had to drop out because he no longer enjoyed pursuing his communications degree. He has told me how miserable he was during this time. As a college dropout, it was very challenging for him to find employment, which is why he started to look for simple jobs that didn't require a degree. He began working as a graphic designer and surprisingly did quite well. He loved traveling and was a digital nomad for a few years before finally meeting me and settling down. Throughout all this, his mother would ask him to send her a monthly allowance, which he willingly provided despite the strain it placed on his finances. When our relationship started getting more serious, I finally decided to tell him about my family and our generational wealth. He didn't believe me at first, but was shocked after he researched my family online. Jack got angry that I'd kept it a secret for so long and accused me of not trusting him. I tried to explain that many people in my past wanted to be with me because of my family's wealth, which is why I had learned to wait before revealing this information. He understood and was mostly okay with it, but occasionally he would make snide remarks about how I never have to struggle or how I will never know what it's like to work hard. This would really hurt me because, despite what my parents had provided, I did work hard to establish myself in my career. I loved managing marketing campaigns and brands, and this is how I supported my lifestyle without needing my parents' help. Jack never fully grasped this, and this should have been my first warning sign. When we decided to live together, Jack was quick to suggest moving in with me since I had a larger place. I agreed and then started discussing how we would share the rent, but Jack didn't like that. He began telling me how he earned so little as a graphic designer, and that because I come from wealth, I should show my love for him by supporting him financially. In this case, it would be by paying for his share of the bills as well as rent. I told him that although I didn't think this was fair, I could let him off the rent, but he had to cover his own expenses. This made Jack raise his voice at me, and he started to rant about how selfish I was and that if I didn't agree to pay his bills, it would show how heartless I was. We argued back and forth, and I finally gave in. I had to cut back on a lot to cover all our expenses, but I was deeply in love with him. Meanwhile, Jack continued sending his mother monthly allowances and buying her extravagant gifts. Through all this, whenever I pointed out how he had the money to send to his mother, yet wouldn't pay the bills, he would get angry and tell me how his mother needed the money more than us, and that she was just a single elderly parent. I would then feel guilty about it, so I stopped bringing this up altogether. When Jack proposed to me for marriage, I was ecstatic. To be honest, looking back, he put the least effort into proposing to me. I thought at least for once he would not be stingy and would go all out for the proposal, but it turns out he thought proposing to me in our backyard was a good idea. To his credit, he did ask my parents for my hand like a gentleman. My mother, who absolutely adored Jack, suggested to him that he should get help from my best friend Emily to plan the proposal for me. He agreed, and they both came up with this genius idea, JJ Facepalm VJ, of proposing to me in my backyard in front of my entire family and friends. You see, Emily had been my best friend since high school. Her family is like my family and vice versa. My mom and her mom grew up together since their childhood, which is how we both became friends. We have always been solid with each other. She was like my sister and my soulmate. We have done everything together. Her mother absolutely adores me, just like my mother loves Emily like her own daughter. When Jack and I started dating, I of course introduced him to Emily, and they became good friends too. So Emily helped Jack not only plan the proposal, but also choose my ring. To be honest, I was a bit taken aback by the surprise proposal, but seeing how all my family was gathered there to celebrate my happy day with me made me feel much better, even though I was a bit disappointed about being proposed to in my backyard. My mother, Emily, and Emily's mother were the first ones to hug me and congratulate me. Jack's mother, Susan, was also happy for us, and told me how she had high expectations for me as a daughter-in-law, and that she hoped I would do everything in my power to keep her son happy. That was a happy night for all of us. Eventually, Jack and I did get married, and even after marriage, I have continued to pay for everything around the house, while he doesn't spend a penny on me. I continued to pay for our weekly dates and our yearly vacations, because Jack insisted that he was saving up money for our future. When I got pregnant with James, our first child, I was forced to quit my job since it was a difficult pregnancy. Jack didn't like that when he first found out and started arguing with me about how I needed to work. Otherwise, we would not have money to sustain ourselves with a child. This made me cry a lot, and this is when I opened up to my parents for the first time about our situation. While my mother sympathized with Jack instead of with me, telling me how Jack was right, and that there are hundreds of mothers who continue to have a job while pregnant, my dad, on the other hand, was furious. He called Jack to give him a piece of his mind, and told Jack firmly that it was time for him to be a man and step up for his family. He warned Jack that if he continued to behave this way with me, he would not let his daughter endure such hardship, and suggested that it might be better for us to divorce. This made Jack quite anxious hearing my dad mention divorce. Although I never wanted to divorce my husband, he and I had signed a prenup at my father's insistence before our marriage, which meant Jack knew that I would no longer be there to fund his extravagant lifestyle, and he would lose the house and his expensive car, which were both under my name. For the first time ever, Jack stopped sending his mother any allowance and started paying all the household bills. I continued to cover the rent since I had ample savings, but the fact that he stopped sending Susan any money made her resent me even more. She had been used to freely sponging off her son, and when he cut her off, she blamed me. When I first gave birth to James, I was extremely happy. Everyone visited me and our brand new baby in the hospital to congratulate us. Emily stayed with me at the hospital for days until I could recover and come back home, since Jack was busy with his job and refused to look after me or the baby once we were back home. Being a new mother made me quite nervous. My parents and Emily VJTM's mother helped me out as much as they could. Susan, on the other hand, would do nothing to help. Whenever she visited James, she would only make negative remarks about me, like how I needed to start losing weight or how I should tend to James as soon as he started crying. Her unsolicited comments were always directed at me, and never once at her son, who didn't lift a single finger to help me out. After giving birth to James, I found myself overwhelmed with a profound sense of exhaustion and loneliness that crept in. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was going through postpartum depression, PPD, which many mothers experience but seldom talk about. Despite my best efforts to communicate my needs and share the responsibilities of parenting, Jack remained distant and unwilling to engage in any way. He would tell me it was solely my responsibility as a mother, and that he didn't want to look after a baby since he had no idea how to do anything. As I grappled with the demands of caring for our newborn, managing household tasks, and coping with PPD, Jack's reluctance to help only deepened my sense of despair. He would even refuse to change a single diaper or feed James. With each passing day, the weight of my responsibilities grew heavier, and the burden of PPD became increasingly suffocating. Despite my attempts to reach out for support, I felt as though I was drowning in a sea of overwhelming expectations and unmet needs. This is when I decided to open up to my parents about my mental health. While my dad was understanding, my mother refused to believe that there was anything wrong with me. She told me that PPD was not real, and that I should be strong enough for my baby to get through anything. When I complained to her about Jack refusing to help me, she scolded me, saying that Jack is the father, and I should do a better job as a mother. It hurt that my own parent couldn't see how hard I was struggling, and it felt like I was drowning with my mother's refusal to believe me, Jack's lack of effort, and my mother-in-law's constant negative taunts. I continued to remain in depression. My best friend Emily, on the other hand, was my constant support. I would tell her everything about my marriage, and she would sympathize and listen. She would also tell me how Jack was a terrible husband and father, and would get angry at his antics. It felt good to know that besides my dad, I had Emily's support during such a tough time. A year later, to my shock, I found out that I was pregnant again. This wasn't an accident because I definitely didn't want another child so soon. But I wanted to trust in God's plan, so I decided to go along with it. Jack was furious, to say the least. He told me that I needed to terminate the pregnancy immediately since we couldn't afford another baby. This led to a heated argument, and in the end, I decided it was time for me to get back to work. I contacted my old boss, who was happy to have me back as a freelancer until a more permanent position would open up. Although my second pregnancy was difficult as well, I was determined this time due to my added responsibility as a parent. This time, when I went back to work, I decided not to deposit my entire paycheck into our joint savings account. I wanted to think and be prepared for my future as well as my kids, so I started to keep 50% of my paycheck, and only the remaining 50% would go to our joint account. Once I started earning money, Jack became lazier every day. He suddenly began to complain about how much he disliked his job and that he wanted to quit. I tried to talk him out of it, reminding him how he didn't have a college degree, so he needed to stick with this job that paid him well. This would anger him since he didn't like to be reminded that he was a college dropout. Jack would tell me how I had taken a break, so he deserved to take a break too. I argued that I never took a break. I was pregnant and struggling while nurturing another human being inside me. Despite our arguments, Jack decided to quit his job, saying that we had enough savings, and that now that I was earning money, he could rest for a while. He would then spend his entire day playing video games while I did household chores, looked after the baby, and worked at my job. I would leave James with my parents whenever I went to work since my mother didn't mind watching him. When I would come back home after picking up James from my mother, I would see Jack sitting in the same spot on our sofa, engrossed in his video games. This went on for a while, and I started to grow tired of picking up all the responsibilities as a parent. In anger, I confronted him about how he needed to spend time looking for a new job. Jack didn't like that, which is why he started to go to his friend's place every day, where they would both play video games. His friend Clint was a middle-aged divorcee whose wife had cheated and left him. This made Clint resent every woman, and he was quite misogynistic. This is also why I didn't like meeting him or going to his place. As Jack started to spend more and more time at his friend's place, our arguments also increased. I was getting tired of being a single parent since Jack literally contributed nothing, but I held on for the sake of my children. When I gave birth to our second child, Emma, Jack was apparently so busy that he forgot to check my multiple calls and messages when I went into labor, which is why he missed it. I never once suspected him, even though these red flags were clearly visible. Emily was also missing when I called her for help, so in the end, my parents had to take me to the emergency room. She came the next day to visit me and the baby and told me how sorry she was for not being there for me since she was stuck at work, which was quite all right with me. After Emma was born, I finally put my foot down and told Jack that this was his last chance, and that if he didn't go back to work, I was going to pack my things and leave. This resulted in a huge fight between us, but I didn't care anymore. I knew that as my children's mother, I needed to be with someone who could be equally responsible, because it would be impossible for me to take care of everything. Never hold anything against him, and that he was free to walk away, but Jack told me that he would start looking for a job the next day. This was unexpected since I anticipated resistance or an argument, but surprisingly, he agreed with me VJ, or so I thought. The next day, while Jack was in the shower and I was collecting his dirty clothes for laundry, I heard a ping from his phone. I turned to see a message on his locked screen from a familiar number. I stopped breathing as my eyes widened in shock. I picked up the phone and clicked on the message that read, "When will you be telling her about us? I am pregnant and can't hold off the news any longer." I was frozen in place as I kept rereading the message. When Jack got out of the shower, he saw me standing still with his phone in hand. He rushed to snatch his phone from my hands, but it was too late. I put the laundry bin down, walked towards Jack, and slapped him as hard as I could. I didn't even think twice. It felt like my body was possessed by someone else. I was shaking with anger, and Jack was shocked by my reaction as well. His eyes widened as he started stammering about how this was all just a big misunderstanding. I looked him straight in the eyes and told him that he was dead to me. I packed my bags, packed the kids' bags, and drove them to my parents' house. My parents were shocked to see me standing in their doorway with my children and luggage in tow. Seeing them, I broke down and told them everything. I've been crying continuously for the last 3 days, as I just can't believe how my life has fallen apart. I told my boss everything, and she graciously allowed me to take a few days off. Honestly, I am at a loss for words, which is why I'm turning to Reddit. My best friend of 25 years decided to betray me by sleeping with my husband of 13 years. Not only this, but she is now pregnant, and this means that Jack and my marriage is pretty much over. Jack and Emily have been calling me multiple times and sending me messages saying how I should at least hear them out, but I refuse to do so. Jack is begging me not to divorce him, saying I should think about our children. I don't know if I should go through with the divorce and take everything away from him. Update 1. Hey guys, thank you for your numerous messages and comments on my post. I know it's been a month since I left you all hanging without an update, but a lot has been happening in my life, so I've been dealing with it. I'm back at work because no matter what happens in life, I can't miss work for too long. Honestly, work feels like a welcome distraction to me. During this time, many of you suspected correctly about Jack and Emily cheating on me for a long time. Emily sent me a long message saying how she didn't mean to, but has apparently fallen in love with Jack, and now that she is going to be a mother, she has to think about herself, which is why she had been pushing Jack to tell me. Jack, on the other hand, knew he would lose access to an extravagant life if he lost me. He knew he had made a mistake, and in his words, he just wanted to sleep with Emily. But because she is now pregnant, he has no way out. He has been begging me to forgive him, and has even gone as far as to suggest that we could probably convince Emily to give up her baby and raise the baby together. His delusions and entitlement fuel my anger even more now. As for how they both got together, it turns out Jack had been opening up to her for a while behind my back while he was supposedly out playing video games all day. He would tell her how he was mentally distressed in his marriage with me since I had been forcing him to get a job. He said how Emily understood him and listened to his problems, and when he opened up about this to Clint, his best friend, instead of telling him how wrong this was, Clint encouraged him to meet up with Emily, saying she was clearly more of a woman than me. This is how Emily and he met up one day just to talk, and that two-faced woman decided to sleep with my husband. I don't know what her motivation was, even though she already knew how awful of a partner Jack was to me, but at this point I honestly don't care. Emily has also mentioned in her messages how I should be happy that she was taking him off my hands since I had wanted to leave him, but didn't have the courage to do so. Maybe this was her plan all along, but who knows? Honestly, I'm glad she decided to take my trash, and now she can live her whole life, regretting ever meeting a man like Jack. I'm also sure that the day I went into labor, they were together, which is why neither of them had picked up my calls for help. But this isn't even the cherry on the cake. When I first told my parents about Jack and Emily, my mother refused to believe me while my dad called Jack and shouted at him for a good half hour. Even when I was crying, my mother tried to say how I could be wrong about this, since there was no way that Emily would betray me this way. I called up Emily's mother to tell her everything, and unlike my mother, she was furious. She didn't even question me and was completely on my side since she knew I would never make up such a thing. She kept repeating how sorry she was and cried with me for a while. She really understood how betrayed I felt at the moment. After talking with my dad, I have decided to file for divorce. We already have a lawyer in mind, and with my prenup and Jack's cheating, this divorce proceeding is going to be straightforward. What might be tricky is the custody of my children, but I know that Jack will never want any responsibility for them, so I am confident I will get full custody. Throughout all this, my mother has been vehemently against my decision to divorce. When she realized that no matter how much she requested me not to get a divorce, I wasn't going to listen, she seemed to change her tactics suddenly and started saying how I should give full custody of my children to Jack. This took me by surprise when she first suggested it, but I thought she was joking at first. When she continued saying this for the last few days, I finally lost my temper today and started shouting at her about how dare she suggest something like this to me. She didn't say anything and walked out of the room. Her behavior has started to make me extremely suspicious. Why would my own mother ask me to give up custody of my children when she knows that Jack is not a capable parent? I feel I need to sit down and confront her in front of my dad to find out exactly what she has in mind. Update 2. It's only been a few days since my last update, but my DMs are flooded with people coming up with their own theories. I know for some of you this might seem like an entertaining story, but for me, this is the reality of my life. My lawyer has served divorce papers to Jack, and he called me crying like a man-child, begging me to forgive him. I just laughed at his misery and told him to get ready to lose everything. James and Emma are doing well despite this family turmoil. Jack never spent much time with them, so they hardly notice that he is missing. It has been very difficult for me to take care of a baby while going through all this, but I'm glad to have my dad's support. Emily's mother also came to visit me since she lives in another city. She hasn't bothered to even talk or listen. Talked to Emily and has told me how she plans to cut her off since this is an embarrassing situation not just for my family but also for her family. She says how ashamed she is of her own daughter. She also knows how deadbeat of a father Jack has been, so she knows that eventually Emily will be contacting her for financial assistance, which she is vehemently against. The news of my divorce due to Emily's betrayal has spread to my friends group as well as my relatives, and everyone is on my side. People are not that forgiving, so they started sending foul messages to both Emily and Jack, abusing both of them. This is when Susan finally gave me a call. Throughout the last month, she didn't have a single ounce of decency to call me for comfort or to apologize. I am sure she knew about all this and was probably ashamed that her picture-perfect son messed up his great life and impregnated another woman. She called to tell me how Jack was suffering so much since everyone in his family had also found out about his indiscretions and was pissed at him. I kept quiet as she unabashedly continued to say how, as a good daughter-in-law, I should return to him and retract the divorce proceedings. She tried to justify her son's vile actions by saying how men can sometimes stray from the path, but that it was our responsibility as women to bring them back. I couldn't listen to her nonsense any longer, so I asked her to shut up. She was taken aback by the sudden rise in my voice since I had always been good and respectful to her. I told her that she should be ashamed of giving birth to a worthless man like Jack who was nothing but a leech, and that if she ever called me back, I would make sure to take every single penny of his during our divorce by bleeding him dry. I reminded her that I was the one who had taken care of her man-child our entire marriage, so she had no right to ask me for anything more now that he has impregnated my best friend. Susan tried to apologize as a last-ditch effort to protect her son, but I warned her that I would take legal action against her if she ever called me again. It felt good to finally stand up to her and show her that I was not the same timid woman that she had met. Jack was going to get exactly what was coming to him, and no one would be able to protect him. I also sat down to talk with my parents yesterday regarding my mother's suspicious behavior. I had already given a heads up to my dad about how she had been forcing me to give up full custody of my children, so he was ready to find the truth from her. I straightforwardly asked my mother why she had been asking me to give Jack full custody of my children, even though it was never going to happen. My mother first hesitated, but my dad kept grilling her, And finally she opened up. To our shock, my mother told me how after I had revealed to my parents about Emily and my husband sleeping with each other, she had decided to confront Emily about it since she didn't believe me. They met up, and Emily started begging her for forgiveness. My mother couldn't believe that Emily had really done something like this, but then Emily started to tell her how she was pregnant and needed Jack to raise her child. My mother, instead of shouting at her, apparently felt sorry for her. She promised to help her out financially and tried to convince her not to break up my and Jack's marriage, saying how Jack could continue to support her child even if he was married to me. Emily didn't want that, so then my mother changed her tactics and started telling Emily that if she was responsible for breaking up our marriage, then she should be responsible for raising the kids as well. Emily was shocked at first to hear this, but my mother told her I suffered from PPD, so I was not a capable mother. The least that Emily could do was raise Jack's children all together as a family, since they would be siblings anyway. She told her that I was never going to let Jack be a part of my children's lives, and according to my mother, apparently, my children needed a healthy parent like Jack more than me, since, according to her, I am mentally sick. My mother even went as far as to convince Emily by saying that if I gave up full custody of my children, then I would be required to pay hefty child support, which Emily could use to take care of her child as well. This convinced Emily, which is why my mother had changed her tune and had been forcing me to give up custody of James and Emma. When my dad and I grilled this information out of her, we were disgusted, to say the least. I couldn't believe that I was facing yet another betrayal in my life. My own mother thought because of my PPD I was incapable of raising my own children, and she would rather have Emily raise them than me. It shocked me that my mother failed to see how I fell into PPD in the first place, because Jack refused to help me in any way, how I used to beg him to be an equal parent while he would feign ignorance, and how I would single-handedly take care of everything while he would look for an excuse to give up responsibility in any way. I started to cry since I didn't know how she could betray me like this after my husband and best friend did the same thing. My dad, who had been quiet for a while, asked my mother to simply get out of the house. My mother started crying as they kept arguing, but my dad told her that their marriage was over. He didn't want to see her face anymore. I don't remember much, but eventually my mother left to stay at her sister's place. I honestly don't know what to do. It feels like I can't trust anyone anymore. Everyone seems to betray me like I mean nothing to them. Update 3. It's been 6 months since my last update, and I know it's been a long time. Thank you again, seriously. Your comments, your support, your messages, VGJ, all of it has been one giant breath of fresh air. Just knowing I have a whole online community willing to go to bat for me has kept me treading water these last couple of months. Your comments have popped up in my notifications when I felt like just giving up on my life when it was too hard and have kept me going. First things first, I got my divorce last month. My dad, who has been my backbone this entire time, kept me pushing. We went ahead with my divorce proceedings, and as expected, Jack got nothing out of me thanks to my prenup agreement. When it came time for the custody of my children, he fought hard for full custody at first, but when that was refused, he tried to go for equal custody. My lawyer argued how he had been a deadbeat father our entire marriage, how he didn't have a proper job, how his mother was an alcoholic, and how he had even cheated on me and got another woman pregnant. This argument cost Jack dearly, and I was awarded full custody of our children while Jack would pay me monthly child support checks. Nothing made me feel more satisfied than watching his face droop in sadness and defeat. I looked back to see Susan glaring at me, and I gave her a smirk just like I had promised. I got what I had wished for. Secondly, coming on to my mother, she has begged and begged me and my dad for forgiveness. My dad has firmly refused to let what she did go so easily, and has asked her to go to therapy to address her internalized misogyny, so she can understand exactly how wrong she was to have treated me this way when I was so vulnerable. I know my parents love each other, and it breaks my heart to see them apart. But I do understand why my dad wants her to talk to a therapist. To her credit, my mother has been religiously going to therapy while she continues to stay with her sister. I don't know if it will help her in any way, but I hope she does change. Although I have blocked Emily, I am still in contact with her mother, Emily's mother, just like she had promised me, has cut off all contact with her daughter. She informed me how Emily has even been removed from her will, and they have added me instead. It seems comical to see how karma is slowly but surely catching up to Emily. I have also heard from the grapevine that Jack doesn't want to marry Emily and wants nothing to do with her child, just like I had always known. Susan is furious with Jack since she has already lost 2 grandchildren, James and Emma, because of him, but he remains adamant in his decisions. As for me, I am doing a lot better since my divorce. I am focused solely on my children for now, and don't want to keep holding on to the past. I won't say that this journey has been easy, but I will say that I don't regret anything that I have done. I am glad I loved Jack and married him, because otherwise, I would not have these 2 beautiful children. I am also glad he cheated on me because this was the final push that I needed to break away from him. Otherwise, I might have been still stuck in a loveless marriage. I guess everything happens for a reason, and I believe in God's plan always.